Good evening, everyone. I'm Lonnie Stonich. I'm the Executive Director of the Family Action Network FAN, and it's a huge pleasure and honor to welcome all of you to tonight's webinar with Dr. Robin DiAngelo being interviewed by Dr. Marcus Campbell. Thank you all for attending. A few housekeeping notes. We are recording the webinar, and in a few days the link will be sent to all of those of you who have registered. And then in addition to which, we'll also post the video on our website and YouTube channel for free public viewing. All attendees are muted and off camera. The chat is read only and Q&A is disabled. I want to say thank you to the more than 500 registrants who submitted questions in advance. We forwarded all those questions to Dr. Campbell, tonight's moderator, and he's been reviewing them over the last few days. Thank you for all those incredible questions. A quick note too that Dr. DiAngelo's books are available for purchase via the bookstall, which is FAN's exclusive bookseller. One of our producers will be putting a link in chat where you can just click on that to purchase the book. Now for introductions, Dr. Marcus Campbell has served as the Assistant Superintendent and Principal at Evanston Township High School since 2013. Among many responsibilities, he oversees the implementation of all district equity transformation programs, training, and initiatives to help improve the overall school culture for all students and to eliminate barriers to the equitable education of students from underrepresented backgrounds. Dr. Campbell has served on FAN's board of directors since 2015. Dr. Robin DiAngelo is a professor of education at the University of Washington and has taught courses in multicultural teaching, intergroup dialogue facilitation, cultural diversity and social justice, and anti-racist education. Her 2018 book, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, has spent 92 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. I'll note that she has excellent company on that list right now with some of FAN's most beloved former speakers, including Brian Stevenson, Ibram Kendi, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Richard Rothstein. With absolutely not 1 second of further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you now. Take it away, Dr. Campbell, Dr. DiAngelo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lonnie, and I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. As she mentioned, my name is Marcus Campbell. I serve as Assistant Superintendent and Principal at ETHS, Evanston Township High School. I know there are many people who are watching all over the country and all over the world, so I just have to specify ETHS is Evanston Township High School in Evanston, Illinois. And we're just so privileged and honored to have Dr. Robin DiAngelo with us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. I am thrilled to be having this dialogue.
It's great to have you here, and we're just going to jump in and get started. And so that people know, Dr. DiAngelo and I have decided to call each other by our first names. And so we're just going to jump in and have a conversation tonight. And so Robin, thank you once again for joining us. We have been looking forward to this, and just a pleasure to speak with you. So let's jump in. I don't want to be too long with talking about George Floyd. I actually want to start the conversation with George Floyd. How have you been processing the murder of George Floyd and the response to his death around the country?
Well, I don't know a more devastatingly heartbreaking image than what looked to me like the sadistic murder in public of Mr. Floyd. I think equal to images of Emmett Till and the impact that had on the societal collective, images of lynching. So very heartbreaking. Now, I'm going to be honest. I had a hard time looking my Black friends in the eye after that. Like, what could I say? How could I possibly bear witness in any kind of adequate way? And glimmers of hope. You know, I have to say it's an incredibly high price to pay for white enlightenment, that is the image it took, that accumulation of images, because of course that's not the only similar thing we've witnessed. And I've been offering a question to white people, because I'm sure you're noticing that we're all asking, what do we do? What do we do? And my question back is, why are you asking that now? And why did you not ask that before? Here, 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 here. And it's meant to be a challenge, but it's actually a really sincere question. Like, why did it take this moment for you to ask, what do I do? And they're asking. So it's a mix. It's a mix.
There have been millions of people protesting all over this country, all over the world. I know that there's some things happening in Seattle tonight. What do you think it is about the way some whites have been socialized, or white people have been socialized, that really makes Black Lives Matter so controversial?
Well, Black Lives Matter emerged because clearly Black lives don't matter. So when people say, you know, white lives matter, why aren't you acknowledging that all lives matter? If we lived in a society in which all lives matter, we wouldn't need to identify the lives that haven't mattered, right? If we lived in a society that truly did not see color or grant meaning to it, we wouldn't have to talk about color or race, right? I think that, I mean, just a few weeks ago, Black Lives Matter was being positioned in mainstream culture as a terrorist organization, right? And when you think about the umbrage that the white collective exploded in over those three words, Black Lives Matter, I think it speaks to a very deeply socialized resentment, a very deeply internalized superiority. You know, of all the things that white people, that we have to look at, I think the hardest is looking at internalized superiority. But I will hold to my last breath that all white people that live in a society whose foundation is white superiority internalize the message of white superiority. Actually, all people internalize it. The impact is different based on whether you are or are not white. So there is somebody somewhere, you know, once said, when you're used to 100%, 98 feels oppressive. And, you know, just simply asserting the value of Black lives seemed to be a piece of that 2% we didn't want to give.
Yeah. You mentioned glimmers of hope. I certainly was inspired when I saw all of the protests in Germany, in New Zealand, and in France, and just in South Korea, seeing the Black Lives Matter sign. And I said, this is a signal that maybe Black folks are starting to be humanized around the world. But what a cost, right? What a great cost that Black America has had to pay just for the acknowledgement that we are human beings as well.
Yeah, and while I see some differences, we have to remember, and Ibram Kendi makes this really powerful point. It's, you know, history is not a trajectory of progress like we're taught to think about it in school. You know, these are cycles. There are constant power struggles and resistance. You know, when I'm talking about the white collective, everybody relax who's white and listening to me right now. I get it. There are variations within the white collective, but I think we can also say there is a white collective, and we have these consistent patterns based on that. And the white collective said we're post-racial after the civil rights movement. And then the white collective said we're post-racial after Obama's presidency. And I hope nobody's in denial, even before the last 3 weeks, nobody's in denial anymore that we are not post-racial. So while I see some differences, we can never be complacent. We can never be complacent. It's a highly adaptive system. It's adapted over hundreds of years. So that is not to be hopeless, but also we cannot be naive about I believe it was Frederick Douglass said a long time ago, power concedes nothing without a struggle.
That's right. So also recently in the news, almost the George Floyd and the Amy Cooper incident were almost simultaneous last week. So over the past several years, it's been making the news that Black folks have had the police called on them for just doing regular stuff. Barbecue, I have a list here: barbecuing at a local park, sitting in Starbucks, shopping in CVS, selling water, mowing lawns, selling hot dogs, going to the grocery store, returning from home, returning from work, playing golf, staying at an Airbnb, napping on the couch in the dorms as a student was doing that, visiting the pool and running a business. What makes, and you have a great chapter in the book on anti-Blackness, what makes Black people such a threat doing mundane things?
Several things. There are two factors that I want to talk about is, first of all, I believe that white people need Black people, and we need you to be inferior so that we can be superior. There is no white without Black. Black people are the ultimate racial other in the white mind. There's kind of two poles here. And we have projected for as long as we've constructed the idea of race, we have projected the sins of whiteness onto Black bodies. Lazy, seriously, etc. I don't actually want to recite the things we have projected onto the Black body. And Toni Morrison puts it really powerful that Blackness is the backdrop against which whiteness rises. Okay? So you have that very deep fundamental identity, right? And that relationship. And then you have this sense that anything of value is white and therefore mine. This is my space. This is my park. This is my university. This is my neighborhood, and you don't belong here. And it reminds me a little bit about like Blacks in the Jim Crow South. When I come down the sidewalk, you will step off and you will not meet me in the eye as an equal. So let's take Amy Cooper, which is such a classic example, right? I'm breaking the rules, but this is my park. And how dare you correct me? And now, right, I am literally going to risk you being killed because I know that the forces of the institution are behind me and not behind you. And the expectation is that my mere mention that I'm going to galvanize those forces should have caused you to back down. Right. And I want to make a point that people who do the work that we have done, and let me give a shout out to Devon Alexander, who is among Christine Saxman, people in your area who have worked for so long to do this work, focus a lot on implicit bias. And we do that to break through the deep denial that so many white people have, that they don't have any bias, right? That they are objective. You have racial bias, right? I just look at the world through objective eyes, right? While she may have had Amy Cooper may have had an initial response to Mr. Cooper, which was implicit bias, it quickly turned into explicit bias. So I don't want to soft pedal it. You don't have to scratch very hard on a white progressive for us to get very mean. I mean, she went very quickly and she knew exactly what she was doing.
Well, I'm going to say something facetiously, like, well, come on, Robin, she voted for Obama. I mean, like...
Yeah, and I'm going to say something. I'd love to hear your response. One of the most controversial things that I say is that I believe white progressives, which are probably almost all the white people listening to us right now, all the white people thinking about all the other white people that really should be listening to us right now, I think we do the most daily harm to Black people. May I ask you if you have any comments on that claim?
I do, yes. You know, it reminds me of, you know, my work. I live and work in a very diverse community, doing a lot of anti-racist work. And part of the pain in that is that the profession of I'm not racist really what they're really saying is I don't want to be racist, but the difficulty in whites failing to acknowledge their own racism is more painful than someone who is openly racist. And it is a very complicated and complex challenge to get whites who don't want to see themselves as racist to own their racism. You talk about it in the book, calling it racial humility. And I want to know, I mean, because you've modeled that even tonight, just being very open and honest about some of the things that a lot of white people maybe think and feel, but they don't say, and they probably wouldn't even want to admit some of the things that you're saying tonight. How do you get white people to engage in racial humility?
Oh, there was so much in there. Can I back up?
Okay, sure.
I want to thank you for reinforcing that claim that I make. And I really want to explain it because I do think that for a typical white person who maybe hasn't thought very long about these issues, it's still going to be a rather provocative claim. So I imagine that for you to come across the Richard Spencers of the world. Richard Spencer is an open white nationalist. He was one of the organizers of the Unite the Right march in Charlottesville. I just think of him as like an explicit racist. My racism is more implicit. Mm-hmm. I would imagine coming across him might be somewhat terrifying, but odds are on a daily basis, you're not coming across Richard Spencer. You're coming across me and all these lovely people who are watching right now. We are the co-workers, the colleagues that likely send you home on a daily basis, having yet again to decide, is it worth it to try to talk to her? Or will things just get worse? I just did a talk for Warner Communication, and before my talk, on either side, they had videos of Black employees talking about their experience at work, and over and over and over. It's exhausting. I'm exhausted. Being the only Black person is exhausting. It's the white progressive that's causing that exhaustion, not Richard Spencer. So I have to ask myself how I'm doing that, not if I'm doing that. Right?
I'm going to say that again.
Thank you. Okay.
It's say, how am I doing it, not if I'm doing it. I mean, just take the assumption that you're not doing it out of it because you are.
And that leads to what you asked me about how do you get white people not to be so defensive, I believe you asked me.
Well, engage in racial humility.
Oh, thank you. First of all, when you change your question from if I'm racist to which, what is the average white person going to answer that question? No, I'm not. So then, what further action is required of me? None. I'm good to go. I know all I need to know, and let's move on. When you change the question to how have I been shaped by the forces of racism that I'm literally swimming in, and I've been swimming in since the moment I opened my eyes, forces so relentless that we could predict whether my mother and I were going to survive my birth. That's how relentless those forces are. When we change our question from if I've been shaped by them to how, it just opens up a whole lifelong journey. And until we understand that racism is that system and is not limited to isolated acts that only mean people who intend to hurt others could ever do, we're not going to get past that defensiveness. If any white person listening to us right now and is holding the mainstream idea that only, racism is committed by people wearing white hoods, then it's going to sound offensive if I say, of course you're racist, right? And I agree. If that's what I thought it meant to be racist, that would be an offensive thing to say. The vast majority, actually all of the racism I've perpetrated in my life has been neither conscious nor intentional, but has wounded others nonetheless. Do I want to know that? This is where the humility comes in. Would you not want to know? Would you not care to receive that so that you understood and could do different or do better? But this kind of, it couldn't be me, actually functions as a kind of arrogant refusal to know.
That's very, very powerful. how can whites, Robin, be expected to deconstruct a system that they have been socialized not to see that benefits them?
This is the master's tools dilemma.
Yeah.
So Audre Lorde has a beautiful quote, the master's, how do you dismantle the master's house when you only have the master's tools?
That's right.
So that sets me up to just say, right now, even as you are interviewing me, I'm the one kind of set up with the voice and the authority. Whiteness is being reinforced in this conversation, right? There's simply no way around that.
Right.
And in a curious way, whiteness stays centered by being unmarked, unnamed, unexposed. So to decenter, you have to expose it. But we're all in it. Like there's no free space. There's no racism free space where we could be out of it and then think clearly. And so that is a both end tension that I just live with, that yes, and to not use this position, to not use this platform or this voice to break with white solidarity and white silence, and to speak to it like only I can. So let me be clear. White people will never understand what we need to know if we aren't listening to Black people and other peoples of color. And there is an insider perspective that I have that you don't have. We need every piece of that puzzle. And for far too long, we've been off the table as if we're outside of race, also known as innocent of race. And you're the holder of racial knowledge, which means you're also the holder of all the racial discomfort and animus. So we offload all that onto you. So that's how I think about that tension. And I also have investments. I can't trust myself on this. I can't trust myself to determine how well I'm doing because I have investments so deep I don't even know I have. You know, it's a system that serves me. It's a seductive system. It's a comfortable system. And so if I'm not in accountability, you know, white people that live almost completely segregated lives and think they're good to go, I'm always like, how do you know? How can you be that sure? You don't even have relationships across race, much less ever have conversations that might challenge that idea.
So in Lee Moonwah's 1994 film, The Color of Fear, there's a gentleman there by the name of Victor who says, racism is not a people of color problem. It's a white person's problem. What do you say to that?
Well, it's a problem that becomes the weight of which on you. So here's what I say to that. Ultimately, it is a white problem in that white people are ultimately responsible for ending it, if you will. We created it, we wield it, we benefit from it, we participate in it. You know, it's not to say that you don't have a role to play, but your role is not my business. It's not my business to tell me what work you have to do. My business is what work we have to do. And maybe this gets into the difference between prejudice and racism. Like everybody has bias. Right. Everybody has bias. And you, before you met me, could have just gone ahead and assumed I was a clueless white woman, which would have been a safe assumption until I showed you different. Mm-hmm. We could call that bias. But racism is what happens when you back my group's bias with legal authority and institutional control. That's why if Chris Cooper had decided to call the cops on Amy, he still would have been the one that risked being killed, right? And so that distinction is really important, and that's why we say the weight or the responsibility, or it's a white problem.
Yeah. I found this very powerful quote by James Weldon Johnson. You know, I'm a former English teacher, so he says, Black America is called upon to stand as the protagonist of tolerance, of fair play, of justice, and of goodwill. Until white America heeds, we shall never let its conscience sleep. For the responsibility for the outcome is not ours alone. White America cannot save itself if it prevents us from being saved. Robin, how can white America save itself from this ugly, call it demon of racism?
Ooh. That is a very, very deep question. I often get asked, and particularly by people of color, Black, Indigenous peoples of color, I get asked, why would you even want to end this? I mean, what would be your investment in ending this when it's
Right.
so serving to you? And, you know, I think I've answered that a little bit. In order to align what I profess to believe with the actual practice of my life, in order for me to be able to sleep at night and say that I'm in integrity. And in my case, I can draw from my own experiences of oppression. They are not the same. They do not compare, but have been very useful to me to connect to and to use that to feel motivated. Like when I grew up in poverty. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I had to work through a very deep sense of class shame. Didn't go to college until I was in my 30s, all of that. And when I realized that moment, when I realized, oh my God, not only am I a complicit in, but I have benefited from somebody else's oppression, that is unbearable to me, that I would contribute to anybody experiencing anything like, much less worse than what it was like to grow up in poverty under capitalism, right? So your question was, how does the white heal? Wow. I need to sit with that.
Yeah.
Such a deep question.
Yeah, and it's about all of our collective humanity, because
Yeah.
whites dehumanizing folks of color, they lose their own humanity in that. But being, I don't really like the word allies. A friend of mine, Dr. Darnisa Armante, who's watching, she uses the term co-conspirators. We all reclaim our humanity when we choose to see each other as, and I want to say human beings because that's that norm, that means white, but just recognize that we are creatures that feel, have emotion and love and all of these things. So, it really is important for whites to recognize this. They may not even know that they have engaged in these aspects or of dehumanization, but we're all trying to reclaim our humanity in this process. I think that one of the things that was so powerful, it was horrific, but it was powerful in that, George Floyd show the world that Black people are human beings. And I think that him crying out for his mother, that horror resonated around the world and say, yeah, maybe I've missed something with this entire conversation. I'm hoping white people are saying, maybe I've missed something in this conversation.
Yes. So part of that journey to healing is to ask yourself why you didn't see his humanity up to that moment. Mm-hmm. And what will you do to continue seeing his humanity and others, given the current arrangement of society? Most white people live segregated lives with no sense that anything of value is missing. And if we're going to be honest, white people measure the value of our schools and our neighborhoods by the absence of Black people.
Say that.
That is deep.
That is deep.
That your absence is what makes my neighborhood good. Every moment we talk about a white neighborhood, and those are the neighborhoods we're talking about as good, we are reinforcing a powerful. See, that's the deepest message of white supremacy for somebody like me. I'm never going to say the N-word, but that growing up without anyone who loved me, taught me, or mentored me, ever conveying that I had lost anything that mattered, that I could go cradle to grave, as most white people do, with no authentic relationships with Black people, and be told I had a good life and a good education, that's really deep.
It is. I mean, I work in the school that is racially diverse, Evanston Township High School. We have been working on issues of race. We name race, talk about and we examine the role and presence of whiteness, to use the protocol from Courageous Conversations. And we've been doing systemic work. We've been detracking and trying to get more students of color in more advanced classes. And as we did that, I noticed that there was a lot of resentment from some whites in our town that says, we don't want our kids in classes with those kids. Some of the most lethal, I mean, I was born and raised on the South Side, and I had Black teachers, Black schools, Black dentist, Black doctor, knew every verse to lift every voice and sing by the time I was in 8th grade. But I had never seen that kind of racism before, that there were very explicit comments that you don't belong, and students don't belong in the same, black and brown kids don't belong in the same classes with white kids. And so we begin to name that and talk about that. And I believe our community is understanding what this conversation is. And it's a lot of work. It's hard work, but you're absolutely right. The absence of Black and the absence of brown bodies it is perceived adds value to white folks.
Yeah, there's another way that really moves me when I think, I was never meant to love you, Marcus. I was never meant to see you or know you or love you. My life, the way it was set up, the way most people's lives are set up, we would not see you or know you or love you. So when the cameras go away, and they will, what are we going to do to keep seeing humanity, your humanity? So there are 3 points I want to make up, because you brought up schools.
Okay.
I don't know if you could have come up with a more efficient way of ensuring racial inequality than the way that we have set up schools.
Mm-hmm.
Schools function as a highly effective mechanism for sorting children into unequal places in society, and we all know it, or we wouldn't care what schools our children went to. But do we care? Oh, yes, right? And one of the primary blocks to racial equity in schools are middle and upper class white parents who want the best for their children, and their children cannot have the best if your children also have equal access, if they also have to compete against your children. And there's another deep place for reflection. Why should your children have the best white parents? Like, what is that about? Right? Why is it okay for somebody's children to have an inferior education, but not mine? So that's one piece. There's a lot. Let me give you a concrete example. Resistance against testing and tracking, right? Even though all the research shows those things are not effective measures, right? Well, they're very effective at something.
Right.
The other is, we like diversity role doses that we can consume. So we like it at the private Montessori school, a little bit of that from the children of the elite immigrant workers at Microsoft, right? That are in similar class bracket that we are in. And again, right groups, right numbers, right class background. But too many Black and brown children from our neighborhood or surrounding neighborhoods, that's a very different dynamic about how much we're going to glow about the diversity of our child's school. And the other is, we often just think it's a matter of adding, right? Adding children of color into white schools. But what we're doing is adding them into hostile water if we've never addressed the whiteness in that water. Are those teachers equipped? Could the average teacher articulate clearly, the average white teacher, what is structural racism, and give me 3 examples of how you see it in this school building, without having a white fragility meltdown at having to answer that question? Let's just be blunt. Schools are intense places. There is a lot of racial hostility towards efforts to challenge racial inequality in schools. So again, we're not changing the consciousness of the people who set the water up and control the water, and then we're adding children into that water. And they might be going to a better school right? They got into a better school, but they're still dealing with racism within that school. So they're still toiling under something the other kids are not, the white kids are not toiling under.
Lonnie mentioned that we got 500 questions tonight, and a good portion of them came from educators, teachers, administrators, saying, I don't know, I know we don't like the how to or what should we do kind of question, but how does a district begin to dismantle generations of structural racism in schools? Like, how does a school district begin to do that? Just a couple recommendations, if you have them, or what's the thought processes that teachers and administrators should have in wanting to undo the structures that keep students of color oppressed in these conditions?
I mean, obviously that's a deep question. There's so many angles. There's so many good guides out there. Two things I thought is that we have to seriously get to a place where if you are not able to engage with issues of structural racism and efforts to challenge structural racism with some nuance and complexity, you are not qualified to teach. I'm sorry, you're not qualified to teach. That should be the number one that you're looking for in a job interview. And you certainly are not qualified to lead that school, to lead that building, to be a professor of teacher education. We actually have to put some teeth behind that belief that in 2020, you got to have some skills here.
That's right.
And, it's okay. You don't have to be an ethnic studies professor in order to get a teaching job. But some skills, and absolutely show that you are able to learn, grow, and respond to continual efforts. That's one. And the other one is straight up outcomes. What are the outcomes? Ibram Kendi says, what is a racist policy? Any policy that results in unequal outcomes. There are only two explanations for the unequal outcomes that we see. And by every measure, Black and brown children are at the bottom. There's only two explanations. Black and brown people are inferior and white people are superior, or racism. If you want to go with they're inferior, and any explanation you have, anything you want to come up with, oh, they don't have this in the home, or oh, they is a racist framework to which you're interpreting what you're seeing. So then we got to get those policies on the table. There's no objective policy.
Yeah. So I'm sure there are a lot of white people who are watching tonight who are beginning their journey, right? They got the flyer from a friend or whatever the case may be. What kinds of questions should white people should be asking themselves as they try to do something? One of the things I caution a lot of whites against is you kind of referenced it a little bit tonight. You talk a great deal about it in the book, and that is looking to the other. It's someone else's problem. It's this, that. But it's the inward look. I mean, but as we talk about dismantling racism, we gotta, before we can go out and be a racial equity Cape Crusader, we have to confront our own challenges and biases. What kinds of questions should white people be asking themselves, not their racist family members or their friends? What should they be asking themselves as they progress on their journey?
The very first question they should be asking themselves is, what does it mean to be white? How has my race shaped my life from even before I was born so that we could predict whether I'd live? And how has it shaped every breath since? Because in my experience, 20 plus years working with white people, most white people can't answer that question. And if I can't tell you what it means to be white, I cannot hold what it means not to be white. I'm going to have no critical thinking on this topic. I'm going to have no skills to navigate this topic, and I'm going to have no emotional capacity to withstand the discomfort of this topic. And that actually is not benign or neutral. That is part of what creates that hostile water, because we bring that collective inability to the table, right? Where decisions are made that affect the lives of people who aren't at those tables. And I'm pretty sure you know that most white people can't answer that question. And that means you can't be your authentic self with us because we can't handle it. And so you are likely tying yourself in knots every day to walk on eggshells, not to unsettle those delicate white sensibilities, and lest things get worse for you and we lash out, right? So that's one. What does it mean to be white? Two, take every white person listening to me right now who's thinking, well, yeah, but I'm different. If you just knew this about me, then you'd know. I guarantee you, nothing you're going to tell me would convince me that you're an exception to what Marcus and I are talking about. Okay. So I would ask you to take anything that you think makes you an exception. You've traveled the world, you speak several languages, you had a Black roommate in college, you adopted children from China, you marched in the 60s, you were in Teach for America, on and on and on. You're a minority yourself. All that stuff that white people think exempt us, take it and then ask yourself how your race shaped how you experience that. Mm. Talk to me, you're a non-binary queer person and you're white. Talk to me about anti-Blackness in the white queer community. You're an Ashkenazi Jew of European descent. Talk to me about anti-Blackness among Ashkenazi Jews of European descent. Talk to me about whether Black Jews have the same experience as white Jews. You grew up poor. How did being white shape your experience of poverty? Do you think if Marcus and I both grew up poor that we had just the same experience and faced just the same challenges? No, there's a huge challenge I didn't face growing up poor, and that's racism. So that's what I would offer on that personal part. But I'd love to ask you, like, what would you like us to be asking ourselves? Or when you asked about healing, what would be a sign to you? Or what do you see in your white students in the classroom that if you could just get them to see something or understand something? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, that's a good question. I'd like to get down a very practical level, and that is, why are all of my friends white, right? Why is my neighborhood all white? Why is the only experience that I have as a white person with a person of color is at work or in some other social setting? Why is it that I live in a white world? I espouse what happens when I want my white children, if I were white, right, to have an experience with people of color, but there are no people of color in my life. Those kinds of questions, I think, can really get to many whites understanding that race was impacting your life 100% of the time, even when you didn't recognize it. Right. Even if you didn't see it, you weren't raised to acknowledge it. You know, growing up Black on the South Side, my dad was a Baptist pastor, and my sister's here, she's a medical doctor. Dad was a pastor, and he would ask me every night at the dinner table, "What do you think about politics?" And what he was really saying was, "What do you think about race in America?" And so I grew up knowing from my dad, having not really understood, like I thought that, that racism was something that happened in Mississippi before I was born. My dad was born in 1939 in Shelby, Mississippi. And he would talk about these racial things, and I would say, well, that was just during that time. But what I realized growing up was that my father was really pulling the layers back over the world that I was living in. And so he guided me and he led me in that way. So, and a lot of Black folks have conversations with their children on how to engage with the police. So we know, right, that the skin that we're in means something. And for white people to recognize that the skin that they're in also has meaning is very powerful.
And I do want white listeners in particular maybe to know that Marcus and I had a little pre-talk, and he did give me permission. I don't usually ask such direct questions. But if I may, in service of I think there may be some folks out that need to hear this. So we're talking about how segregated most white people's lives are. So what would you say to a white woman who says, I'm not racist, I'm married to a black man?
I would say that you are, and you may not want to be, but think about your own implicit bias, right? It might even mean in going online and taking that test just to get some empirical data like, oh, maybe I do have biases that I should be recognizing. So yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah, that there's, given the work that I do, I often have students write racial autobiographies. And there are a lot of white students who will talk about dating outside of their race. And one of the things that always comes up in almost every class is an interracial relationship, where it's refreshing for me to hear that the white student in class actually could own their own racism while being in an interracial relationship.
Yeah, great. So in other words, when white women say, I'm not racist, I'm married to a black man, you're not then convinced that they're not racist?
No.
Okay. Clearly, the potential for deeper understanding of racism is there, and this person may not be an explicit racist, but that doesn't mean that race isn't in their relationship. And it's funny because I'm married to a white man, a cis man, and I'm quite clear that even though he loves me, he is not free of patriarchy, and it didn't all his conditioning under patriarchy didn't vanish because he loves me. Right. But the moment there's fond regard across race, white people want to claim that there could be no racism. And that goes back to that simplistic idea that it's conscious, intentional dislike across race.
Okay, I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but you talk about the good, bad binary in the book. Because I know that as people are listening to this, some white people may be struggling, but I'm really not racist. This is not a moral indictment, right? This is not to say that you're a horrible person and you have, you lack a sense of common decency. This is not that. What it simply means is you have bias.
You have bias, and yours is backed with power.
Yes.
And so you're having a different experience. The privilege of that shaped your worldview, your personality, what you take for granted, what you respond to. You have internalized a sense of superiority that you may not be in touch with, but you can feel it nonetheless, etc. So lately, I've been just coming out and saying, I'll look into the camera, just so you know, when I look this way, I'm looking right at Marcus. Very hard to have such a conversation without looking at you, but I'm looking at the camera now, and I'm going to ask white people to remove the claim, I'm not racist, from your vocabulary. Remove it. It's functionally meaningless. It doesn't convince Black people. Check me there if I'm wrong. When you hear a white person say, I'm not racist, you're likely actually thinking the opposite. Uh-oh, clueless. This person doesn't understand racism. This person's going to deny my reality. And if you're like reeling, like, why on earth would she tell me to remove I'm not racist from my vocabulary? This is a place where the humility comes in. My learning will never be finished, but I likely have more experience and study in this area than most white people who are listening. And if I'm telling you to do that, then probably you're missing something, not me. So there's another area you want to educate yourself in. Why are people saying that? That's counter to to the paradigm I have. And we're here to tell you the paradigm you have is set up to protect racism.
Yeah.
It has to change.
Yeah. So getting to some of the, I know some people are thinking about, okay, they're processing. How can a white person speak up for Black folks without speaking for Black folks?
Okay, I'm gonna hope I modeled this, and I am open to the opportunity that if I did not model this, that you could tell me that. Mm-hmm. So I'll talk about why I think I modeled it, and then I would love to hear you check me on that. I've just been in countless conversations and dialogues and experiences over the last 20 years. And there's some very consistent themes. And I feel like I can share those in a way that still challenges white people and doesn't focus on, isn't it sad? We do love those movies that show the tragedy of Black lives. You know, we love The Blind Side. We love Hidden Figures. We like to, that's much, he's shaking his
I
head.
help. I can't stand
All right,
those.
go for it. That's much more comfortable to look at the tragedy because it also reinforces a sense of benevolence within us. It's a really problematic dynamic. So how do you bring to the table what you've come to learn and understand without speaking for? I hope that's woven into my teaching. If you think the things I'm saying about white people are insightful, it's a mixture of both my own, you know, I'm white. And I've spent years thinking deeply, but I've gotten years of feedback that it's almost like it's a mirror that has helped me see what it means to be white.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think I do?
Yeah. I think you do pretty great.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that because
No,
I really do. I mean, I have followed your work and I've heard you speak, and it's like right on. I appreciate, you know, hearing a white person speak in this way, to affirm my experience that I don't have to say it as a Black person, carrying that burden. I love it. You know, my boss, Dr. Eric Witherspoon, he gets up as a white man and he just names it. He says, you know, what he needs to say and what he's got to say. And it is just like, whoo, I don't have to carry that burden today. I'm glad he's carrying it, and he's not speaking for me, but he is speaking up for racial justice. And that is what I think is very, very powerful.
So that brings up a question for me, is not to put you on the spot, but what does it look like, if you could come up with an example, when white people do speak for Black people in a way that's not supportive?
What is it like?
What does it look like? Like, what would be?
They usually start off with saying, "I have a Black friend who says."
Oh, okay.
That's what usually occurs. With that as a preface, it's usually I can't really hear that. It has to come from a place that you just mentioned, where you know they've gotten feedback, you know they're on their journey, and even if they say or speak up and may say the wrong thing, at least they're speaking up, because white silence can be even more dangerous in conversations around race where white people just won't say anything at all.
And on that note, I wrote an article called "Nothing to Add: The Role of White Silence in Cross-Racial Discussions." So if people want to hear more about that, especially those ones who see themselves as introverts, I'll give you the punchline. You might be an introvert in most situations, but when you default to silence in this conversation, the impact is complicity with racism. We're not going to get where we need to go from a place of white comfort. And most of the things that are probably going to keep you comfortable in the conversation are exactly what's going to be things that say to Dr. Campbell, don't be your authentic self so that I can stay comfortable.
Yeah. As I've been watching the news the past couple of weeks, just reflecting and thinking, and just this week, after George Floyd's been laid to rest, it looks like there's, I don't want to call it progress, but there's been some change being made. I saw that HBO is not going to run Gone with the Wind, which I think is interesting. Whoopi Goldberg I don't know if she thought it was a good or a bad idea, but she said that's a long list, to start pulling movies like that, which I thought was an interesting perspective. NASCAR has banned the Confederate flag at its competitions. Local city councils are banning chokeholds. We're having a national dialogue about police brutality in America. I believe it was yesterday or today, that Breonna's law is been signed in place in Louisville that really bans no-knock raids. Breonna Taylor was killed in her own home during a raid in her own bed. when the person that the police were looking for was already in custody. All of these things are happening, but it seems like this is reform, but actually what we need is transformation. And I really wonder, how do we get to a place where our schools are transformed and our criminal justice system is transformed, and all of these institutions that play into structural racism in the healthcare system. I mean, I'm just even amazed that even some white doctors don't believe that Black people can feel pain in the same way that white people do. There's studies on that. But how do we get to a place of transformation? These reforms are great, and I think they're absolutely needed. But what I'm looking for is a bit more. I'm looking for transformation.
Yeah. And let me just say something, because I know sometimes white people are like shocked. What do you mean that study showed that, upwards of 50% of medical residents think Black people feel less pain? And even though that's just like horrifying, it makes sense to me because we do live segregated lives overall, and we rely on the most repetitive representations of Black people, which are always hyper athleticism, hyper instinctualism. For a really good example of that, watch The Blind Side with a critical racial lens. And so it makes sense, tragically, that it just seems like you would feel less pain, closer to animalistic, and that's white supremacy. I think we need to turn to visionaries. I don't think we can think about it within the current framework. And Angela Davis has been talking for decades about abolishing prisons. And I always, I've even heard her talk, and I still kind of uneasy about that. And I just read an article, I highly recommend it, on Medium, from a former cop who says you can't reform the police culture. It has to be a completely different way of thinking about these things. I'm an educator, there are visionaries out there, but we're going to have to turn to them. I don't think we can fix it with the master's tools.
I agree.
I mean, that is not to minimize the psychic impact of you being able to go to a NASCAR race and not see a Confederate flag. The psychic impact of going through a military academy that wasn't named after a Confederate, right? When we remove those things, that makes a difference, and it does add to a cultural change, but it has to be more, and it has to be sustained. Yeah.
Robin, it's been just great talking with you tonight.
Thank you.
Is there any closing comments or anything that you'd like to say in the last 60 seconds that we have with so many people joining us?
Well, I'm going to try out this new little analogy. I've always got analogies.
Okay, you're a teacher. Okay.
All right. Every white person listening to this conversation has an opinion on this topic. And my experience is lots of them are sitting back deciding whether they agree or disagree. And I would say you can't grow up in this culture and not have an opinion, but it doesn't make it informed without intentional sustained study. So that'd be like, I've been to the Epcot Center, and so I am ready to engage with Neil deGrasse Tyson in the "Is Pluto a Planet" debate. You have to think about that for a minute. It might not work. It's my new one. I'm trying it out.
No, it's good. It's good.
So please have humility. Please have humility. Guilt is natural. Defensiveness is natural, part of the process of coming to consciousness. But the question I will leave you with that has never failed me in all my years is not, is this right or wrong, true or false, good or bad, but how does it function? If your guilt is functioning to immobilize you and to excuse you from staying in the struggle, it's functioning to support racism. If you can't move through your defensiveness and get to the other side, and you use it to say, forget it then, I'm not saying anything, it's functioning to uphold racism. So if you're trying to figure out if something is or isn't racist, just keep asking yourself, how does it function and how do I know?
Dr. Robin DiAngelo, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Keep the faith and be well, be safe, Robin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much, Marcus. Thank you so much. What an incredibly insightful, provocative, both from the heart, the mind, everything was hit all at once. It was a somatic experience, at least for me, and I'm sure for the thousands of people that have tuned in. We hit about 8,500 people, Robin. So that's just amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. From us in Evanston to you in Seattle, we're so, and from everybody all around the country and really in countries all over the world, thank you so much. So for all of our guests, thank you for attending. Stay tuned for more fan programming. Sign up for our newsletter. And for those of you also who purchased Robin's book through the book stall, you probably saw in the webinar registration over the last 10 days or so. Those who had purchased a book are invited to an after hours with Dr. Campbell. He's going to kind of debrief and digest everything that just happened. So thank you. You should have gotten some kind of a link from Zoom about that. So keep an eye out for it. Go back into your inbox for those of you who have that. So thank you, Robin. Appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. Best wishes, everyone. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Where did all those people come from?
They came from all 50 states. They came from Australia, from England, from Scotland. They came from everywhere. I mean, not to you're muted now. Actually, let me unmute you.
Still live.
I know, and I'm still live. That's okay.
Okay, that's okay. Is the network just worldwide, and that's why?
It is right now.
That's incredible.
It's you know, it's not. You know, I don't want to say something crass like don't let a good pandemic go to waste. But when our, as you know, you were scheduled for an event with us on March 16th, and which was then canceled when the COVID pandemic emerged, and we had to cancel. We canceled 14 speakers and 20 events, and you were among the first that had to get canceled. So we pivoted to this. These are our very, very first Zoom webinars, and obviously, clearly, your topic could not be more of a hot topic, clearly, and you are, you know, that 92 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It's a confluence of forces, and we're so grateful to you for coming back and giving us a do-over. Our community.
I'm so glad you did this, because you see, like, it will never be the same again. You know, Marcus and I together, our chemistry, this moment, I'm so glad you did this. I mean, you know, I could have given that presentation, but it wouldn't have been organic. So thank you for that.
Just so you know, we are still live. So,
I know.
I just want to make sure. I wasn't quite sure where you might go with your comments. So I just want to make sure you know I still got about 6,000 people watching you.
When I pull out the glass of wine, you'll know you better just cut my video.
You could have pulled out earlier. Thank you, Dr. Robin and Marcus. We'll see you in just a few minutes in the after hours. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.